Day 5 of the pantry challenge. It's Sunday. Typically what I like to do on the weekends is try and make my menu for the week, the dinner plans, and then prep anything that maybe I can't do when I get home on a weekday, things that might take some time, such as bread. So Wednesday we're gonna have corned beef sandwiches, and I really enjoy using rye flour the most when I have those sandwiches. But I'm in a pantry challenge, I can't go to the grocery store. Plus, it's been years since I've purchased bread from the store. I'll do it on rare occasions, but for the most part, I make the bread here in the house. I could not find the rye recipe that I've used in the past, and I absolutely love the way that sandwich bread comes out. I checked all of my cookbooks too. I haven't a clue which recipe I used, so I just did some Googling, found a Pinterest recipe from King Arthur actually, so I'll link it down below, the recipe that I'm using here today. We'll find out together how it comes out. Okay, so here's the cliff notes of the ingredients in case you're curious before you go and check out that link. 2.5 teaspoons of yeast, 2/3 to 7/8 cup of water, lukewarm. I just did 1 full cup of water. 1/4 cup vegetable oil. I used pure olive oil. 3/4 cup dill pickle juice, which is admittedly a very odd ingredient. I've never used that before. 1.5 teaspoon table salt, 1 tablespoon sugar, 1 1/4 teaspoon caraway seed, 1 1/4 teaspoon dill seed, 1 tablespoon mustard seeds. I omitted all of the seeds. 3/4 cup dried potato flakes, which I used, or you could use 1/4 cup of potato flour. 2.5 cups of unbleached bread flour. I used all-purpose flour. 1 1/3 cup of pumpernickel flour or rye flour. I used rye. Okay, this dough feels very, very beautiful. Now, rye bread is a little bit more of a wetter dough. So you don't want to you don't want to knead it easily. It's going to stick a little bit to your hands. As long as it's hydrated properly anyhow. So if you're used to making regular bread and you've made my sandwich bread before, that you can see I've touched it a few times and it's sticking to me. That's actually perfect. If you keep adding flour in order for it to not stick to you, you're gonna end up with a drier dough. You might hear music in the background. My husband's bathing one of the dogs, so if you hear that, sorry. It is actually recommended, not just in the King Arthur recipe, they've mentioned it, but in other rye recipes, you probably don't want to mix it by hand. It's not that it's, I'm not sure how they describe it, why they say, let me see if I can, you're working the gluten, and you probably, because your rye flour and the way this dough is, it's going to be difficult for you to properly work your gluten, is basically what it boils down to. So this is a recipe that you really probably want to rely on your mixer or your Bosch, whatever mixer you use, to knead it for you. Typical bread, you need about 5 minutes. Rye bread, you want to knead about 7 minutes. My mixer, I don't think kneaded it for longer than 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm just gonna go with it. We'll see what happens, because what ended up happening is it's getting stuck on my dough hook, and the whole thing is just going around. It's not actually kneading the dough anymore, which is one of the downfalls of having a KitchenAid stand mixer. It just doesn't knead it properly with most of my breads, but that's okay, I digress. I'm going to get this into a clean bowl. I'm gonna oil it, I'm gonna cover it, and we're gonna let it rest for an hour, hour and a half. It's pretty warm in the house today, so it shouldn't take much longer. You may not see this huge rise because working with heavier flours such as rye, hard, you know, wheat, some other flours, because it's heavier, if you will, you don't necessarily always see this fabulous rise like you do out of the white sandwich bread, but that's okay. I mean, you should see that it's expanding nonetheless. So if after an hour, hour and a half, it's not doubled in size, that's okay. Move forward with your recipe. It should still work out okay. So we'll see what happens with this. I don't feel like this bread has done anything. But I'm gonna take my advice and I'm just gonna move forward. If it does not rise in my bread pan, I'm gonna have to scratch this and do something else. So let's see what happens. It feels really good. I know my yeast is not a problem because I just made sandwich bread yesterday and those turned out, you know, just as expected. So I also brought two different pans. I think I'm gonna go with this one. Okay, so I'm going to put this in a little bit more of a controlled environment. I'm going to turn my oven on. I'm going to put this on top of my oven. I know it'll, you know, be very warm over there. And hopefully I'll see this expanding. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to scratch it and do something different. So, you know, cross your fingers for me. This is looking promising. It has filled the cavity. It's risen a little bit. It's going to rise a lot more when it's in the oven. All bread does that. I would have preferred it to have a bit more of a healthier mound, but I'll take what I can get at this point. I have hamburger buns in the oven now. Those only need to cook for about 10 minutes. I'll have to drop the temperature, and once it happens, I'm gonna put this in and we'll see what the final results are. Looks really good. So, King Arthur, don't fail me now. That's after 20 minutes. Now I'm supposed to tent it and put it in for another 20 minutes. So, I don't know. We'll see what we can do about tenting. I imagine it's so it doesn't get incredibly dark, but it's not. I mean, it doesn't look like it's at a risk of that just yet. As my foster son would once say, ta-ta! Okay, so we're gonna let this cool down about 5 minutes, and then we will invert it onto a cooling rack where it will cool down, and I will store it away in the freezer once it's completely cooled down. I don't plan on using this until Wednesday. And even though we're not slicing into it, I want to maintain the freshness as much as possible. And then this way, should something change with my menu plan and we don't get to making that on Wednesday, freshness is not jeopardized in that bread. Now, it looks like a success. I was worried about whether or not this would rise. I was not expecting a huge mound like my white bread, so I knew that wasn't going to happen. I still don't know just how much of a success this is just yet though, because it could be incredibly dense, really chewy. You know, you just don't know until you slice into it and try it. So I'm hoping it's not an absolute fail. If for some reason this bread is terrible, we'll still move forward with dinner. We'll just use my white bread. I mean, it's really not the end of the world. I'll probably take out a fresh loaf so I can slice it much thicker than what my bread machine does. But any event, I'm excited. I still wish and will still look for my last recipe because I know that one was a win. But I have this saved so that way once we actually use it, if it's really good, I then will handwrite that recipe and put it into my recipe book. So there's no question what recipe I like to use.